turn it over to our team lead, Heather Worrell, to take us away.
Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. I am so excited to be here with the entire digital innovation team. Everybody unmute and say hello.
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 Good morning.
Good morning, everybody.
Hey, guys. Good morning.
Hello.
Morning. This is the Dream Team, and I'm so privileged to get to work with these remarkable leaders each and every day. And today, we are super excited to talk a little bit about blended learning. We as a team have been engaged in some blended learning book studies since the beginning of the year. These books are by Caitlin Tucker. Do you want to go ahead and show the first book, Matt, that we're going to be talking about
Yes, absolutely.
today?
Here we go.
So Caitlin Tucker is a great author and teacher, and she wrote three books, and we're getting ready to start reading her third book as a team, if we ever are allowed back in Camp Edwards and can get to the books. But the first book that we started was her book, Blended Learning in Action. And I can't see it. Does Matt have it up? There it is. Okay, I see it now. Blended Learning in Action. We started reading this book as a team and really digging into it chapter by chapter at the start of this school year. And we had a lot of takeaways and insights. And the first thing that we want to talk about, and what we're going to do as a team is break it down chapter by chapter. And each one of my teammates is going to lead a chapter. And we hope that this book will help shape your thinking and help prepare you and give you good ideas when we think about creating these blended learning environments moving into the next school year. So when we're finally allowed to be with our kids again in the brick and mortar building, we're hoping that you'll get some takeaways from this book study that we conducted to create those blended learning environments. So thanks for being here with us today. But we can't talk about blended learning until we first talk about the Samour model. So Matt, if you would go to the next slide for our viewers, we want to talk about the Samour model. And I just saw a really great tweet go out by Brian Morrison, and he said a digital worksheet is still a worksheet. And we totally agree with that. You know, a lot of people start in substitution phase, and that sometimes is a great place to start and get your feet wet with technology. But eventually, we want you to move beyond just a digital worksheet. So great tweet from Brian. And I really encourage all of you viewers and our school digital innovation leaders and STCs and awesome teachers out there. I want you to join us in this blended learning conversation, because now's the time for us to really come together and start talking about the power of integrating technology effectively into the classroom to provide innovative instructional experiences for kids. So this is an awesome Samour model logo that our one and only Elaine Abernathy has created. And along with this logo, she also created a short little video that we'd like to show you to kick off our blended learning book study. Matt, can you take us to that video at this time?
I sure can. All right, here we go.
Every day, our teachers are designing activities to target higher order thinking skills and in order to engage students in rich learning experiences. Integrating this technology adds a whole new level to teaching and learning. And how can technology transform our learning design? Well, there's a Dr. Ruben Pentanora who designed a way for teachers to evaluate incorporating their technology into instructional practice. And this is the Samour model, and you can use it to reflect how you are integrating technology into its active substitution, augmentation, modification, or redefinition. We like to look at this model like moving up a ladder. And we're trying to shift use of technology from enhancing learning to using it to transform our learning. So how can we teach above the line with number talks? Let's take a look at the example of number talks in the classroom and how it evolves through the lens of Samour. So in substitution, technology acts as a direct tool to substitute with no real functional change to the task. This would be students just writing it down on a Google Doc. So they're substituting a handwritten problem for a typed problem. Really, the task is the same, with no real change in student engagement. In augmentation, our technology still substitutes, but with some functional improvement. What if we had students take that number talk and enhance it with productivity by being able to revisit their number talk?
My name's Ava, and
My strategy is making tens. So I used 5 plus 5 equals 10.
In modification, technology should allow for significant task redesign. So let's take that same number talk and have our students use Jamboard to write their number talk. Then they can share these number talks with their peers and provide real-time feedback.
So I knew 3 plus 6 would actually equal 9. Then I would need to erase 10 and make into a 9. Then erase the 20 into 19. I need to erase this. Make into 19. 19 plus 4 equals 23.
Here, technology has significantly modified the original task by introducing the benefits of student collaboration. Now, at the top stage of the Samour model is redefinition. When we incorporate technology, it allows for the creation of an entirely new task that was previously inconceivable. What if students transformed their number talk into a multimedia production? After creating several, they could edit clips and add them together to have a number talk evolution, provide feedback from their progression of number talks throughout the year. So in this case, technology redefines the story of the number talk. It includes media creation, critical thinking, collaboration, and communication.
My name is Aubrey, and
They can always check that video out. It's on our channel.
Okay, sorry.
We'll have the link at the bottom of this video.
I wasn't sure how much longer that went past the backpack skills, so I wasn't sure.
I didn't go too far. I'm not sure.
Okay, so I think you got Elaine, a lot of love in the chat about the video, and I told everyone that we are going to break that piece of the Samour model. That's actually in a much longer video where you and Andrea from the math team, you guys came together and did an artifact design studio on number talks, and you incorporated that video. So we're going to take that little segment out and create an on-demand episode, and we'll work to share that with all of our STILs and STC leaders and also post it on the channel real soon. But the Samour model is a key piece as we talk about blended learning strategy. So we wanted to make sure to have a discussion about that. Digital innovation team, anyone want to point out anything in particular about the Samour model that our teachers should be aware of?
I think one thing to be aware of is a lot of people see the Samour and they really want to get to that R with the redefinition, but it's important to understand that you cannot always be in redefinition. You should never be expected to be there. Substitution is always acceptable. Augmentation, we like to think of it a little bit like a pool, and you have your shallow end and your deep end. Nobody wants to go to the deep end and stay there and try to tread water all the time. So you want to be able to go back and forth through that pool.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's what I was going to, that analogy with the pool is so important, that you're going to be back and forth all the time there, depending on what it is that you're trying to have kids do.
That's right. So that pool analogy, and a lot of teachers start in the shallow end, right? They start with substitution, but we don't necessarily always want to stay there. We do want to try to swim out a little bit deeper and try to integrate technology in the upper levels of the Samour model from time to time as well. So very good point. Okay, so let's move on, Matt. If you would go back to our blended learning and action slides and show those to our viewers. Jenny Stiff, can you think of the Samour model like blooms, the higher, the more rigorous? Absolutely, Jenny. I think that's the exact same concept. Very good point. Chelsea says, you will move fluidly through Samour when teaching. Exactly, Chelsea. And I'm excited. I know Chelsea is going to be helping to lead the JCPS Dig In chat on Monday with some other middle school leaders. So Chelsea, feel free to talk a little bit more about your experiences out there at Newburgh teaching with the Samour model. Okay, so we're going to go through chapter by chapter, and each one of the digital innovation leaders is going to take a chapter from Blended Learning in Action. And for those of you who haven't read it, this is your opportunity to get a quick blink on each chapter and learn the major concepts in the book quickly without actually having to read the book. If you'd like to read the book, your digital innovation leader has a copy, and I'm sure once things are back to normal, they'd love to let you borrow it. So we will start with chapter 1. Who's going to take it away with this chapter?
Oh, that would be me. I had chapter 1, which was very short and sweet and a nice introduction to get us started into our study of the book. So basically the concepts that are on my slide are the things that were outlined in that chapter. First of all, Catlin and the other authors said that they don't really want to give a definition or redefine blended learning. But for those people who have never been introduced to blended learning is just a combination of online learning with the traditional brick and mortar education that students are getting when they are in school. So they are really not trying to define that for you, but give some scalable classroom practices that teachers can take into their own teaching. So the first one would be personalization, which is giving students opportunities that are personalized to their own preferences, things that they are interested in doing. And, when we first started out with doing this study, this was just things that we were learning about in theory. Some of us had experiences with blended learning. I know when I was in the classroom or in the library, I tried a little bit of blended learning. But now with our NTI experiences, we're really seeing a lot of these practices come into play. And personalization is one of those things that I am seeing a lot of people try to do for their students because they're trying to draw them in and keep them interested while we're in this NTI situation. So personalization is the first practice that is mentioned in the book. The second would be agency, which allows kids to have some decision making in their education, really giving some of that power to students instead of the teacher having all the power in their learning, giving students an authentic audience for their work that they're doing. Again, I'm seeing some of that when I'm looking at things that students are creating for their choice boards, or even like when students are keeping those journals now about their own personal experience during this pandemic. That's an authentic audience. They're writing to people that may read that in the future. Connectivity, so allowing students to be connected to their peers and connected to the world around them, and then creativity. Again, these are, something else that I'm seeing a lot of things, a lot of people being able to utilize now that we are having to engage students in things that they weren't really doing in the classroom, but really trying to engage them and keep them active in their learning. So that creativity is just allowing them to demonstrate their learning how they would like to demonstrate it in creative ways. So moving on from those scalable practices that we want to give teachers or allow students to have in their education, the next thing that the book talks about is that culture is really key when you are trying to implement a blended learning strategy. So everyone has to be motivated in order for blended learning to work. It can't just be one person or two people within the building or a few schools within a district that are trying to implement this. It has to be a culture of blended learning, and everyone has to be on board. I don't want to keep tying it back to our NTI strategies, but I really see that is giving a lot of people the motivation to learn these technology tools so that they are being able to connect with their students. And so that motivation is giving us a ramp into being able to do these blended learning practices when we are allowed to go back to school. And hopefully it stays around when we are allowed to go back to school in the fall. So speaking of motivation, every stakeholder has a role in scaling this blended learning strategy from the district leadership down to parents. And so district leadership, that's the top superintendents, assistant supes, they have to lead this vision for their districts. School leaderships, such as principals, assistant principals, they have to take their school vision and align it with the district vision. And then teachers have to have that buy-in and align both the district vision with the school vision and their own classroom vision. So it all has to be aligned and everyone has to be on the same page. And then from there, the IT team, such as the innovation team or over on the integration side, have to ensure that the technology infrastructure works, and our innovation team will be there to help students and teachers learn the practices together. So that is a key component as well, because if the technology doesn't work, then teachers will be less reliant on it and less willing to be able to use it. And then students have to take ownership of their learning, and parents are also encouraged to support students in their learning. And again, with this NTI experience, we're having a lot of students and parents, work together in partnership with the parents and the principals to continue our learning while we are outside of school. So this chapter, again, when we first started our dig into reading it, you think about it in theory, and now a lot of the components that are laid out in chapter 1 are really coming into play with this NTI experience. And I think that it'll be really interesting to see how it continues in the fall and beyond that. And just to end, one of the things that the chapter says that I really thought was interesting is that our students are already there. They spend hours in the worlds that they create in Minecraft, or, now kids are on TikTok all day long. So they're in these worlds all day. They spend hours there. And as educators, we can either continue to do what we've always done, or we can use blended learning to bridge the gap between where education currently is and where students are. So this will be, really interesting to see how blended learning grows in the future.
That is one of my favorite quotes in the book, the quote about kids are already there. They're already creating these worlds in Minecraft. And now, are we going to embrace this exciting learning opportunity for them? Because they're already there, whether we want to talk about augmented reality or not. And I think about my own kids in the Minecraft worlds that they've created during this time. And it's just like, how can we, if that's what excites them and engages them, how can we incorporate that into the classroom and give them those opportunities? So very powerful chapter. We're going to move into chapter 2. Thanks so much, Sade, with Jack Bosley.
Yeah, I just have to say that I agree with both of you. We had to set a hard and fast rule at our house that no Minecraft can occur until both my kids are done with their NTI work, because it was creating all sorts of animosity between the two, that somebody would get an early jump into the Minecraft world. So been thinking a lot about you, Jim Unger, lately with all your work in Minecraft. But
I was thinking maybe that should be some of their NTI work.
That's right. So let me get over here where I know Matt's doing this, but I'm looking at my own slides. So coming off of what Sade just said, the question, all of chapter 2 is about how you get started. And really there are 4 main steps to do that. And it's pretty well laid out with, like most things, you want to establish a vision and decide what your purpose is, move on into the assessment of your stakeholders, get into planning and design, and then establish a pre-pilot for what is working so that you can try things at a small scale and fail forward, I guess. So step 1 with that vision and purpose is really identifying who your stakeholders are and engaging them to make sure that you're getting all your voices heard from administrators, teachers, and the students themselves, so that everybody has a voice in what's going to happen in blended learning. Then you move into the assessment phase where you're trying to figure out what's your starting point? Where is everybody at? You know, going back to that Samour model, are we in the shallow end? Are we in the deep end? How are we going to assess where we're at as both a district and at the school level to figure out both the principal's proficiency and teachers' proficiency in the blended learning model? And then moving right into the planning and design, what digital content do we want to have as part of this? What tools are we going to be using and apps? And how are we going to train teachers and get that PD out so that we can do this successfully? And then the pre-pilot, again, I think is one of the smartest parts that Caitlin and the other authors talk about, is that you don't want to do a full-blown version of this. The pre-pilot is designed to make sure it's okay to mess things up. And if that does happen, how are we going to reassess to move forward and make it better? To find, like I put in this slide, where are the kinks in the system?
And so, Jack, that chapter is really high level. That's district level, thinking about blended learning. And I know that there is a big district push with this notion of everyone to one is kind of where we're heading in the fall, and the funding. And so when we think about, we can't just put devices in schools without a plan. So your chapter is really about what the district should be thinking as they prepare for one-to-one rollouts, and what principals should be thinking, and ensuring that everyone has the same instructional vision when it comes to blended learning, correct?
Yeah, that's right. So it gives you kind of a blueprint on where are you now and where are you going. That's exactly right. And I think it can be done both simultaneously at the district level and the school level.
Very good. All right. So thanks so much, Jack. And these are all things that we're thinking about as a district. We've been talking about digital agility from the top down for quite some time, and really trying to build the capacity and the digital agility of the adults for the past 2 years as we've launched the Backpack of Success Skills. So where do we go next? We definitely need to be thinking about blended learning vision and strategy. So great chapter. All right, moving into chapter 3. Who's up?
I believe that is me. All right, so chapter 3.
Hey, Kathleen, I know everyone knows who you are, but just in case, just introduce yourself and your role.
Oh, sure. I'm sorry. I always forget that part. So my name is Kathleen Receiver, and I am the digital innovation leader along with James Unger for our Zone 2 crew, the 32 elementary schools. So my chapter talks about the blended learning elements of effectiveness. So there are 4 different elements that Catlin Tucker discusses about the effectiveness of blended learning. And capacity building is one of the first ones that you can see on the slide. And she states that the capacity building is the foundation of the blended learning initiative, and that one of the greatest challenges of the blended learning initiative is that the teachers and the leaders and the students are all learning new skills together. So this reminds me a lot of right now, a lot of us are all with NTI learning these new skills together. Just like Sade said, we're doing this part of it now with NTI. And that this new paradigm can be very unsettling for our instructional leaders, as well as the teachers and even the students and the parents. And it creates anxiety and just nervousness. So that is very normal. But on the other hand, Richardson, who, I don't know if you listen to TED Talks, but Catlin says that Richardson in his TED Talk talks about people who model their own learning process are better able to connect to other learners as a regular part of their day. And then they can continuously learn around the things that they have a passion for. And I really like that quote in the book. If you really think about that, it really resonates with me, and I'm sure a lot of you as well. So building the capacity is very important. And then the next thing that is extremely important for the effectiveness of blended learning is also the technology that is involved, the technology utilization of technology. So one thing with technology is yes, it's important, but making sure, and as many of you may be aware, making sure that we are using that technology as it is appropriate and meaningful. And we want to, as we watch with the Samour video, we want to make sure that it is enhancing our instruction. We're not just using technology to say we use technology and scanning a worksheet and putting it in Google Classroom. So really making sure that the technology is enhancing what we are doing. And then we go into, sorry, I'm doing kind of what Jack is doing, is going back and forth between my slide, the data management. So as far as data management usage, since leveraging formative data is to adjust your personalized instruction, it's one of the greatest benefits of an effective blended learning initiative. So using that formative assessments and data to go back and see what is working and what is not. A lot of this book really discusses the assessment part. And I'm not going to go into that because I know that one of the chapters here in a little bit, we'll discuss more of the data. Okay, and then the last but definitely not least is the student ownership. So the height of a blended learning initiative is when students or learners take ownership of their learning. And that's a quote right out of the book from Catlin. And so part of that student ownership, as you can see on my slide, there are 4 different elements there: the self-resourcing, self-directing, reflecting, and correcting. So inside of her book, and like Heather said, if any of my Zone 2 schools are out there watching, I'm happy to let you check that book out from me once we get back to school. It is at school or at Camp Edwards, but I'm happy to let you borrow that. With self-directing, the student has input into the content and the pace and also the structure of their learning process. And then you go into self-resourcing, the student has access to resources that can facilitate the learning process and the wherewithal to identify any additional resources that they may need. And then you go into the correcting. The student has their own self-awareness to reset and reorient their path when they're faced with challenges. And then they go into reflecting. So as a student assesses the overall process and makes broader, they can make broader adjustments as needed. So this is a really good chapter just to talk about the real key. And as you can see, my beautiful, I know Matt was proud of me for my chart here, my beautiful elements of effectiveness, that these are really important when we're talking about blended learning and starting this initiative in your classroom and school.
Thanks so much, Kathleen. I want to read a few of the comments coming in. Brian Franklin had a really good one. It's about the task, not the tools. Figure out the task first. That's the end game. Then what lends itself to that. And we could not agree more. What else are you guys seeing in the chat? And there's a lot of good conversation.
Well, I think that when Chelsea just hit the nail on the head, was it's so hard to give up that control and let your kids just kind of fly high and go beyond your expectations, because we try so hard to have that classroom management and keep that under reins, but then it's difficult to let them go and be free and go outside of your boundaries of what you expected for this, for a lesson. So that is a very good point. And it's hard, but it's just a practice that we need to make sure that it's a muscle that we have to practice and strengthen as well, to let our kids fly high and innovate rather than just regurgitate.
Yeah, that's a good point, Elaine. Not to keep harping on Minecraft, but when I was out helping teachers earlier this year, they were so worried that they felt like they had to master Minecraft to know absolutely everything that the kids know. And that's just not going to happen. They are so far ahead of us when it comes to stuff like Minecraft and other things that they're into, like we've said, for hours in a day, that it would take you all year to catch up with them. So you just have to let some of that go.
Yeah, it's the same point I was going to bring up, Jack. Absolutely. There's so many teachers that are like, oh, well, I really want, and you're going to learn from your students. And that's as it should be. They've been doing it for years. They've been playing it, depending on how old they are. They've been playing it for many years. But never be afraid to learn from them. We say fail forward. it's a learning experience, which is what it should be for all.
And I was even
Kimberly, I wanted to just pull in real quick, Danielle, what Kimberly Curry said ties to that. She said, my scholars teach me all the time. They really rise to the occasion when they have the opportunity to demonstrate leadership and ownership. And that's awesome, Kimberly. And sometimes as teachers, we just have to let go and be okay with not being the expert. What were you going to say, Danielle?
Sorry. Yeah, girl, that's Zone 2 crew teacher right there.
Love it. I was even going to reference yesterday we had the show with John Baking and Tinkercad, and that was the theme of the show. He even talked about how he didn't know a lot about Tinkercad. Well, of course he knew a lot about it, but students were even showing him items in Tinkercad that he didn't even know. So that's a good point to note that we give students that tool and we let them fly. We don't have to be the expert in that tool, and we let them curate.
That's right. Okay, so that's a good ramp into the next chapter. Who's up next? And viewers, each of the digital innovation leaders has up to 5 minutes to discuss their chapter. So as they're discussing, keep those questions and comments going. Who's next?
I am. Hello, I'm Jim Unger. I'm the digital innovation leader for Zone 2 with my partner, Kathleen Receiver, Zone 2 crew. All right. And we talk about preparing teachers for blended instruction. And it's very interesting, and I always like to draw parallels, but you'll see that in here that talks about teaching teachers, and a lot of things they talk about with that is the same as how you would teach students with some of the things we should do. And one of the first comments they make in this chapter is that most professional development is wasting teachers' valuable time. And I think anybody that's been in education for a while could probably agree with that on a lot of professional developments they've been to. So they go through in this chapter and talk about what should be going on and what should not be going on to make for effective professional development when looking at blended education. So when we look at this, they talk about transitioning from owners of information to facilitators of learning. And many of the comments they make is interesting as they talk about, teachers having to change their frame of mind and understand the walls of the classroom come down. But I think we're so knee deep in that now, it's unavoidable. So it's very interesting. And then we need to look at how to change preparing teachers for that. So they talk about what works in professional development. So they've got D&D, which stands for duration and distribution. And they look at PD, and through studies, they've shown that the most effective is doing like 14 hours on a topic, but breaking that up over time so that they can revisit it. Once again, much like we do with students. C&C is coaching and collaboration. And that's really what gets into with the second book that we've talked about, is looking at how do we do the coaching process? How do we keep this ongoing learning with the teachers and making contact with them? And that's through coaching and collaboration. It's an extremely important piece. Then they talk about simulation of practice, which is role-playing through activities, looking at what you're going to be learning. And probably one of the best science PDs I was at was with Lacey Eccles and Charlotte. And we actually went through a unit in science and did the experiments as if we were students and we were the teachers at their PD. And we learned so much by doing it, and we knew what troubles the students would run into because we actually got to do it. So that's what's important with technology, is the same way. And I really like that teachers are having to meet now virtually, and they see the collaboration and things that their students are going to have to go through. And that's a great way to learn. You learn by doing. So then with the technology, it's interactive digital learning experiences. If we want you to learn about a Chromebook, you need to be using a Chromebook. If you want to learn about an iPad and how to use it, use the iPad. So very important there is actually using the things you're talking about. And so a lot of that points to embedding the training into your day and seeing those people that are wanting you to get the professional development, showing it to you. And then it gets into a lot of what not to do. And some of the things you've probably experienced before in your careers, what not to do, top-down mandates, somebody coming in directing, this is what I want you to do. I'm not going to have anything else to do with it. I'm done. So no leadership involvement. Obviously, that's bad. One size fits all. And I'm going to get to that in a moment. Much like the students in our classroom, we all have varying levels of skill. And we need to understand that, especially when it comes to technology and blended learning. Don't take teacher training and tie it to punitive measures. That's certainly not going to go well. Forcing teachers across the gap, and I'll talk about that. That comes into differentiating for teachers, much like we would for students. The gap they're discussing, and I'm really rushing through this. There's so much in this chapter. It's really good talking about how to prepare your teachers, and you have to do it long before you get your students there, because like a couple of my friends have already talked about, most of the students already have, and they're thirsty for this, but we got to get this front loaded with the teachers. So what they're talking about, that gap, is they talk about in this chapter the different levels where you have people that are really great with technology. They've used it, they're experienced. You have, when they talk about marketing, you have your early market, people that are in there getting it, and then there's this gap. And then you have the people at the very end that are just coming in. They want to make sure everything works. I'm cool with it. Those are the ones that are really been doing a lot of that substitution from Samour before they ever move into anything, being comfortable with it. And how do we get them across that gap is using these techniques. And with Chomp, it talks about how to conduct this. And it's things to keep in mind while you're doing your training: collaboration, hands-on, ongoing, having the right mindset, and personalizing, because teachers are not going to learn the same. Obviously, if you're looking at a more seasoned teacher that has not been around the technology, or they've been using some different things, then you have some new teachers coming in and they're all these ideas and bursting out of them. They've been using the technology. They've been around it all their lives. So it's going to be a little bit different for them. And we need to keep that in mind when we're delivering our professional developments. One of the things we like to do is we love putting our videos up, and you go through it as you need. You may want to go back over something 3 or 4 times, or maybe you just want to skip past that. Oh, I know how to do that. Let me jump past that. So that's the great idea about using YouTube to put out our development.
So Jim, chapter. So this chapter is all about preparing teachers, and fortunately, unfortunately, how you look at it, all teachers were kind of thrown into being digital teachers during this NTI closure. So a lot of people had to just jump in and start swimming, which we've seen people really soar to new heights during this.
I think one of the greatest things was seeing everybody getting all these new certifications that they didn't have. They're getting Apple certified, Google certified, I'm getting Screencastify certified. And it's so great that the skills that they're gaining are just huge. Even when we return, those are those things we want to see carried over, and that's where it starts to blend.
And Heather, you mentioned us being kind of thrust into this. We were helping a gentleman in the live video technical chat who was so excited. And I was like, oh, how long have you been teaching? And he said, well, I was set to retire this year. He said, and I thought, well, I've got all my packets made up. I'm ready to go. And this it. He said, so now I'm learning a ton. I don't know what I'll do with it, but I'm learning a lot. So I was like, that's great.
That's exciting, yes. So I guess when we get back to our schools, just the intentional support plan in supporting teachers with, now let's take this back into a brick and mortar building, and let's talk about how you can continue integrating technology meaningfully to make an impact in student learning. So the next couple chapters are going to talk about that. So let's move on. Who is up next?
That would be me, Russ Hockenberry, Zone 3 Digital Innovation Lead. For elementary schools, and I had chapter 5, and so this chapter was all about devices and digital tools. So this quote was in this chapter. It just says, if teachers don't use tech tools that students rely upon outside the classroom, students will find the work they do in school to be more and more disconnected and irrelevant to their actual lives. So to me, thinking about using this technology, kids are using iPads at home. They're doing stuff. You see teachers creating TikTok videos and principals creating TikTok videos. So we've kind of brought that world into this NTI world as well. So we're using those tools that these students are familiar with, and they're making it more relevant to their lives. So that was a great quote to bring into this NTI situation that we're in right now. And in this chapter, they talk about critical spaces for learning. And there are critical spaces for learning in a traditional classroom, like, for example, where we get information, we look on the board. Teachers write information on the board. But in the digital classroom, we might look where the information is going to be. It might be on the blog or on the stream of your Google Classroom. That's where students may get information from. There's discussion. Where does discussion happen in a traditional classroom? Usually it happens in real time, whether it's whole class or small group. But in a digital classroom, we have an ability to make it asynchronous. We can have discussions that aren't necessarily in real time, whether that's through something as archaic as email or Google Classroom, or we can make them synchronous through Google Meet. Discussion happens in Google Meet, obviously, during this time, during office hours or whole class meetings or small group meetings. Collaboration. When we talk about collaboration in a traditional classroom, usually it happens in a small group or pairs or whatever, think, pair, share, that kind of stuff. But with Google Classroom, in that digital classroom, we can use Google Apps. Google Apps were built for collaboration. So a perfect differentiated instruction there with collaboration in a digital classroom. And I feel like that's going to be even more important as we go back into school. If social distancing is a part of our lives, we're going to have to find ways to collaborate digitally. And so those Google Apps are perfect for that. Creation. In a traditional classroom, kids might get out pens, paper, glue, different materials, build things with. But when a digital classroom, we're talking stuff like they're creating videos, they're creating infographics, different digital art. So you see there just the difference in the spaces for learning there between the traditional classroom versus the digital classroom. And so we need to have those things in mind when we think about what kind of devices we want for our school. So this graphic here is a lady thinking about what kind of devices she'd want for her school. And she's thinking about the plus and minuses of each device there. And so tablets, laptops, Chromebooks, BYOD, bring your own device, is something that's mentioned in the book. It's really not so much of an option in JCPS. But when we think of tablets, laptops, and Chromebooks, they all have their pluses and minuses, but you really have to think about what you want to do with that device in order to, basically, if I want to do, what do you want kids to create? Does a Chromebook lend itself more to that? Or does a iPad or tablet? Do I want to do this or do I want to do that? Battery life may be an issue you look at. Do you want a keyboard? Is a keyboard not so important? That kind of stuff. But we want to get out of making blanket recommendations. People would ask us all the time, do you recommend iPads or Chromebooks? Really, we want our kids to be digitally agile. And that's what that agility toolbox is down at the bottom there. We want them to be to have digital agility, and they can have multiple, basically, where they can pick up any device and be able to do anything on that device. And so that's what we need to think about too. Is we can't be in a Chromebook world, but also expect kids to know how to use iOS apps. So digital agility is important. They call it digital fluency in the book, but we actually call it on our team digital agility. That's just being able to pick up any device at any time and being able to run with it and create.
Yeah, it goes back, Russ, to what Brian said in the chat. What is the task that you want those kids to do? And what you say all the time, you're our biggest cheerleader on that student creation piece. What is it that they want to create? And this is the device that you need to do that. And making sure kids and schools have all of those choices would be ideal.
Absolutely.
So Russ, real quick, speaking of creation, let's give a quick shout out, an STLP shout out. Would you share the good news with everyone about STLP Stayed at Home?
Yeah, we had 6 schools move on to level 3 judging for their showcase projects. So 6 JCPS schools, 5 elementary schools, and 1 middle school that moved on. So that was great news. And at 1 o'clock today, KDE is streaming the winners. So
very exciting. Thanks, Russ. That was a powerful chapter. So team, we're running out of time. So let's do 3 minutes. And tomorrow we'll be back with book number 2. So let's get through book number 1 today. Who's up next, Stephen?
That is me. Yes. Stephen Durham, Digital Innovation Team, birthday boy. My kid decorated my room. My chapter was about the digital curriculum. And if you look, digital curriculum defined, there's textbook and workbook replacement. But it was interesting coming back to this slide during NTI because lecture replacement. When I originally read about this, I was like, oh, that's great. Teachers can make a video and their students can be watching that video. while the teachers may be working with other students in a different station. But one of the barriers to that is, how do we get teachers to actually make instructional videos? And during NTI, so many have made videos with Screencastify or clips that they've actually, they now have that skill. So I think it's great that a lot of teachers are going to go back to the classroom ready to do that lecture replacement part. And then station rotation integration plays a big part in it as well. And I believe Matt Balka will talk about this more. But the way I did my slide, if you click down there on that blended learning video, I actually went to a classroom and I taught the classroom the traditional way, where I gave all the directions and all the students were doing the same work at the same time. And then I monitored the work and helped the students as they went. And then we tried the blended learning approach, where there was a group of students on iPad devices. There were a group of students that were collaborating, working together, and then the teacher was with a small group. After we did this, we interviewed the students to see, like, what did you like about each one? And the kids loved, one, being able to use technology, two, being able to collaborate together during that time, and also getting that smaller group instruction with their teacher. And so that's a really important part of the blended learning model. And like I said, Matt will cover that more later. But when we go into the digital curriculum, a lot of it is about, just like Russ said, with when you go to pick your device, so many times it's on such a tight turnaround schedule, and you might look for, okay, what can we get the best price and how can we move forward? But it's important when you make those decisions for your school, you might want to get a committee together and talk through it. You might want to get student input, or actually you should get student input. Find out, is Dreambox or Zern going to be the better product for our students? Which one will our student population respond to best? And then make sure that you build capacity through professional development. Don't just buy a program because you heard another school was successful with it and then implement it, and your teachers never really learn how to take the data from that program to instruct their learning further. I was just thinking about, when we're talking about Dreambox and Zern being used in the classroom, I was just thinking about those Study Island videos that we've been having on the Digital Learning Channel lately. So like Study Island was introduced, and not a lot of teachers had training for it, but we've had all that training going on the Digital Learning Channel. And now I think our staff that is using Study Island can really get in there and see how they can use that digital curriculum tool to impact student learning. And then I just want to finish with the quote from a 9th grade student. I feel most creative when the topic of the assignment is not narrowed down to the point where everyone is doing the same work. And again, I got to go back to what's happening in NTI with choice. These kids are going to come out, they're going to expect to be using technology in some form in their classroom, and they're going to want to have that choice. And blended learning is going to give them opportunities for that.
Love it. All right. Who's up next? Great chapter, Stephen.
Hey guys, Kyle Chandler, Digital Innovation Leader with Miracle Middle Schools with my partner Elaine Abernatha. And Durham, I just wanted to quickly say, agree 100%. And if any of you guys from our respective zones need help on any of those committees for technology or anything like that, if we can be of assistance, let us know. We'd love to help. So this chapter was about assessment and learning. And my team will know why this is funny. This is my good slide. So this is this one has to do what I mostly found to be with kind of in ways what we're doing a little bit. We're a little bit ahead of the curve because in some points it talks about not just relying on previous years standardized assessment data to see where students are before you move forward with your blended learning strategy. But to really be intentional about continuing that throughout the year. So if you think, well, what has JCPS done to kind of break that up in the last few years? Well, we instituted math testing. So yeah, we still do K-Prep and all those mandatory things, state and national testing when required. But we initiated math testing through our own volition so that we can see better snapshots and smaller spans of student improvement and can adjust accordingly. So it kind of even suggests a step further within the classroom and giving regular formative assessments, as opposed to the summative assessments less frequently, to kind of get a better gauge of where students are more regularly using digital tools to adjust that blended learning strategy. It discusses with assessment in a blended learning environment the power of instant feedback. There's a direct correlation between that and student success. The research shows in Caitlin Tucker's book that we read. And again, I believe I'm referencing chapter 8 in my slide deck there. So that was very powerful, and I believe we know that to be true. We've experienced it ourselves, and we try to give that to our students, but it is difficult sometimes with some of the traditional methods. When we move to these digital tools and these new blended environments, it frees up a lot of things, and we can put some of that leverage on the technology to do that for us, and then we can give the student feedback. It talks about maximizing the learning management systems. So a lot of you guys, again, we've kind of been thrust upon. We've got great utilization for Google Classroom and things of that nature. So that's huge. But in there, you can do polls, and there's a grade book in there, and tests and quizzes. You can upload rubrics. Making it personal. And so this goes back to some of my other coworkers, pals earlier mentioned this, that you could make it personal through the use of technology, not just a device, not just an iPad necessarily or what have you, but mixing up what's available to the students. Yes, it's nice in theory to have a device in every student's hand, but I've given the opportunity, if you maybe mix that up with some Spheros or some robots or some virtual reality goggles, or things of that nature, you never know if you give them access to, or the makerspace, 3D printing, what's really going to spark in a student until they have exposure to it. And that's part of our job with digital agility, is to make sure that they get that access.
Awesome, Kyle. We're going to move on to Elaine. I really want to get to the station rotation and the blended learning model that Matt's going to share. So Elaine, do you want to hit a couple points on your slide real quick?
Absolutely. So this just talks about the ability of, or the different abilities in a classroom. And they just talks about how you have high flyers and one that's never even had technology outside of school. And it's important for us as teachers to realize the different levels and differentiation of our kids. And write exactly what Kyle just said, is that we need to make sure that we understand that differentiation. But and then we have to think about it's never just one device. You have to do the different devices and give them that exposure of those different devices as well. And we have an amazing checkout things that you can do with our IT3 department. So you want to check out and see those different devices that you might be able to get your hands on, as well as we have devices that we can come in and model for you as well as a team. Make sure that you differentiate for those tools and know the ones that are those high flyers, and not just make sure that, or expect that all of them are entry level. Allow, and I think this is important, to allow the high flyers to model that for the other students and give them the spotlight, and they'll teach you. You don't necessarily have to know it through and through, and I think we've said that before. And then one thing we want to make sure that we talk about is digital citizenship. Our students are constantly in this world, these virtual world, and it's so important for them to understand what digital footprint that they leave for their oncoming future. And we need to make sure that we are touching on the digital citizenship. And just make sure that you take those teachable moments and talk about that digital citizenship, as well as modeling your mistakes. And it's okay to make a mistake, and that you too are a lifelong learner.
Awesome. Thanks, Elaine. Now, Matt, how do we do blended learning in the classroom in regards to station rotation and some good blended learning models?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about station rotation really quickly. So when I did this, I tried to be the hot shot on the team and actually make a station rotation lesson for everyone. So I'm going to go through really quickly. So this is what a station rotation looks like. You have your students move through different rotations. So I made 3 for this lesson. One where you can see it's the computer and the students. They're doing an independent reading. One where you can see it's the teacher and the students, where they talk about strategies and design for small group instruction. And then one where it's students and students working together with a small group card sort. And so what I do when I was a teacher and I did station rotation was at the different stations, I was in a chemistry lab. So I was able to print off these instructions and have them taped to the lab station. But my students would take, depending on how many stations I had and depending on how long I wanted each station to be. But typically my classes were 45 minutes. So it would be like 9 to 10 minutes per station. They would move through about 4 or 5 stations. And they would follow these instructions. So they would make a copy of something, or I would have it in their Google Classroom for them or something like that. They would read this passage, they would take notes, they would discuss, and they would do these different instructions at each station. So what station rotation allows us to do is it allows the students to have different learning experiences in the classroom while getting different parts of that content. And I believe Caitlin Tucker in her book goes through what an English lesson would look like. So maybe one of the stations is the students learning some vocabulary collaboratively. And another station is them reading through half of a chapter of To Kill a Mockingbird. And then another station is going through and analyzing some of the symbols from a previous chapter or something like that. And you want to have these stations where they don't necessarily build off each other because the students are going to go through them in different orders, but to allow different types of learning, different modes of learning, and different types of collaboration to occur in those. It is very challenging at times to create these things, but as a teacher, it is the best thing you will ever do for yourself. 2 years ago, I took my chemistry curriculum, I made it entirely self-paced, collaborative, and self-driven, and I worked one-on-one with my students as they went through different stations. And as a chemistry teacher, that meant I had labs and readings and all these things going on. And at times it feels like controlled chaos, but it's so much better for me, it's so much better for my students, and the learning is just so much more powerful that way.
You were a high school chemistry teacher,
yes,
and you made it happen.
Yep.
And I think we need to do a whole episode just on that, talking about your experiences and your structure. Danielle, bring us home.
Yes, so Danielle Washburn, high school and state agency digital innovation leader. Okay. So I'm going to go fairly quick through my slide because we do have 2 minutes left. But my slide was on whole group rotation. And whole group rotation uses online components to allow students the opportunity to control the pace and path of their learning. So it's all about personalization. Our teachers designing lessons so students can get the most benefit from their learning. The book also talks about how to even design a whole group rotation by incorporating digital tools. And we know now that we are on ATI, most of our students are using devices. We do still have students using paper packets, but she goes through 3 simple steps on how to design a whole group rotation. And that is, first, identify the target skill and learning objectives, design activities that focus on the identified skill, and then decide how technology can be used to enhance and personalize learning. So I know this entire talk has been about, or can we incorporate Minecraft? And you can incorporate Minecraft in designing those lessons. In the book, there are also sample lesson plans that you can go through. There's a Google drawing. I know my teacher, my kindergarten daughter teacher, she really used the whole group rotation by designing specific groups to incorporate learning. And the last thing that I want to talk about is crowdsourcing. She really does a good job of explaining what crowdsourcing is. And that is really looking at how now students are the flow of the information instead of solely the teacher, because the students do have the ability to go out and do their research, look on Google on how to incorporate or how to learn about those targets, those learning targets. And I know that we are over time, but the book is available. Matt and I, if you're a high school or state agency, we do have the book for you so you can borrow.
Thanks so much, Danielle. So this book is really just a first step big picture overview into blended learning, and it really breaks it down, and we start stepping into the group rotation. On Monday, you need to come back, because on Monday, we are going to take it a step further and talk about Power Up Blended Learning. So the next book, Power Up Blended Learning, we will be back for an hour extended share on that book, and we'll go deeper into best practices with blended learning in your classrooms. Thanks so much to this fabulous digital innovation team. I always say I'm so blessed to work with such amazing, caring, passionate educators, and I'm grateful for you.